So today I'd like to welcome Michael Dougherty. Is that how you pronounce it?
I do, yes.
And he is the new Boulder District Attorney, Boulder County District Attorney, so that you do cover the entire county, so every city in that county.
That's correct.
That's right. All right, so got some questions for you. Why don't we just start out with something simple? Just tell us a little about yourself. How'd you get here? What schools did you go to? A little about your family, maybe. Can you grab the doors?
Well, first let me say thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to start connecting with the members of the Longmont community, so I'm very grateful to you for making the time to have me on today. I am extremely honored to be Boulder's district attorney. It is by far the greatest honor of my career. I've been a prosecutor for 20 years. I'll tell you a little bit about my background and then happy to answer other questions that you have. So my grandparents, all four, came over from Ireland on the boat with little but the shirts on their back. And they settled in Brooklyn, New York. That's where they raised their families, and that's where I was born. Grew up on Long Island, and coming out of high school, when I was in high school, my dad was a New York City public school teacher. My mom was a waitress. So we didn't have much money, and I went to community college to start my college education. So that's why whenever I come up here, whenever I'm at Front Range Community College, I love talking to the students. In fact, when I was there recently, not to digress too much, but being able to talk to one of the college students about, I was in your shoes, and now I'm the district attorney. And her jaw dropped. She's like, really? I'm like, yes. You can use this career as a springboard to do anything you want to do. And I really feel the community college in many ways was a starting point for me, because I worked at UPS loading trucks at night and a deli on the weekends, put myself through school. And I was fortunate enough then to get into Cornell University to finish my bachelor's degree. After graduating from school, I worked for a law firm in Midtown Manhattan as a paralegal. It was a good year, but it, more than anything, cemented for me my commitment to public service. So I went to Boston University Law School knowing I was going to go into public service. And throughout law school, I worked for different public defender's offices. So I worked on a death penalty appeal out in California my first summer, and then next 2 years for a public defender's office in Boston. In my third year of law school, there was a professor who to this day is a mentor of mine and a friend of mine, who convinced me that I might feel more empowered to do justice and do the right thing as a district attorney. So I went to the Manhattan District Attorney's office coming out of law school. I was very fortunate to get an offer to work there. So I started there in the trial division, and in my 12 and a half years there, I specialized in sex crimes, human trafficking, and homicide cases, and eventually was promoted to the executive staff, where I was put in charge of the day-to-day operations for 1,300 staff, which was an amazing experience and helped me realize the importance of having a leader who cares deeply about the mission of doing justice and also helps the staff with the resources, the training, and the support they need to achieve that mission. Perhaps most importantly, I also met my wife at the Manhattan DA's office, Antonia and I. Antonia was the head of the Identity Theft and Cybercrime Unit when ultimately we left. But you had asked before we started what brought us out to Colorado. Mm-hmm. I have two younger brothers. One of them had moved out here in 2001. And then my parents had sold their place in New York and bought a place in Boulder. So we were in the process of visiting them and fell in love with the county then at that time.
So it's family, really.
It was family, yeah. But what actually prompted us to finally make the leap was the opportunity to head up a wrongful conviction project. The Attorney General's office had secured a federal grant to look back on cases involving murder, manslaughter, and sexual assault, determine if anybody was in a state prison here in Colorado who was in fact innocent. So Tony and I determined to be part of a prosecution-led effort to uncover wrongful convictions would be a tremendous honor. So we moved up here. I started up that project, and I was overseeing that project, and included the exoneration of Robert Dewey out of Grand Junction, who had been wrongfully convicted and served 18 years in state prison for a murder he truly did not commit. Interestingly, there was no police misconduct, no prosecutorial misconduct. There was a mistake by an eyewitness and a rush to judgment by some people involved, and Mr. Dewey had taken some steps that people thought were suspicious, and all that led up to him being convicted of murder when he's completely innocent. And our work helped lead to DNA testing that not only exonerated him, but led to the identification, arrest, and successful prosecution of the actual killer, a man named Douglas Ames. And then I helped, it was a team effort, but I helped get a bill passed to allow Mr. Dewey to receive financial compensation from the state of Colorado every year. I think it's $70,000, as well as health care benefits, and if he wanted to go back to school, tuition. none of which, of course, could repair the damage of 18 years in state prison when you're completely innocent. But that law is now in place in Colorado for any individual who's in the same shoes as Mr. Dewey. From there, I was put in charge of the criminal justice section for the Attorney General's office, where I was in charge of the environmental crimes unit, and we successfully prosecuted polluters and environmental crimes. We also prosecuted human trafficking cases, which was something I was passionate about and specialized in New York, and a variety of statewide cases here in Colorado. And for the last 5 years, I was the second in command for the Jefferson County, Gilpin County District Attorney's Office in Golden. So I've been commuting down 93 for the last 5 years. So as I joked with my wife the other night, on March 1st, when I was sworn in as your district attorney, thus began the greatest honor and the shortest commute of my 20-year legal career. But it's a great office, and I could not be happier to be serving as DA.
That's great. Fantastic. So you came to Colorado after working at the Manhattan District Attorney Office for about 12 years to head up, as you were talking about, the Colorado DNA Justice Review Project. So tell us a little bit about that time in New York, about reasons for taking this job in Colorado, and really what you think you accomplished at the DNA project, which I believe you touched on some, but overall, how did that go, and is it really still in effect, or did they shut that down?
It's a great question. So we really enjoyed working at the Manhattan DA's office. I mean, the volume, the pace, the intensity. For example, arraignments in New York is open from 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day of the year, including weekends and holidays, year-round. So when you start your career, you have your docket, you have your caseload, but you're also told you're working Tuesday night, Thursday night, and all day Saturday. And that's just the world that I grew up in as a prosecutor. I thought that was normal. But it was normal in New York because the caseload was so high. We had 95,000 cases a year in Manhattan. And it was at a time where crime was still at a real high for New York City. So I watched that change over the last 20 years. It was incredible to watch that happen before my eyes and to, in some small way, watch the DA's office be a part of it. But what brought us out to Colorado was we had just fallen in love with Colorado. I actually had come out here. I ran the Pikes Peak Marathon.
Ah, so you are an outdoors guy. I figured that had something to do with it.
Very much so. But trust me when I say that training in Brooklyn, New York for Pikes Peak Marathon was not the ideal training program. But I survived, I finished, and we went back to New York knowing that if the right opportunity presented itself, we would love to move out here. And that's what we did. And that project, to me, was the right opportunity because a prosecution-led effort to uncover wrongful convictions was fairly, especially then, innovative. So the opportunity to be part of that effort. And I'll tell you one part that really will stay with me forever is, so I arrived in Colorado, and one of my first tasks when I got here as part of the project was to tour the state and earn the trust of every elected district attorney, Republican and Democrat, to open up their case files to us. Because the Attorney General has no legal authority to go in the door and say, give me your files. In Colorado, they're independently elected, of course, as you know. All 22 of the elected DAs in the state, including Stan Garnett here in Boulder, gave us complete and unfettered access and support to go through those case files. The project was limited to convictions after trial, so not guilty pleas. If I had control over how it was set up, which I'll come to in a minute, I would have included guilty pleas. And it was limited to DNA cases. And that actually eliminates a fair number of cases right off the bat. So for example, if you have a child who's sexually assaulted by a family member, DNA is going to play a limited, if any, role because DNA is going to be shared in the space where they live. So cases like that were not considered by the project. So we actually did two projects. We did that one on a federal grant, then we applied successfully for a second grant that allowed us to include guilty pleas and allowed us to take more felony offenses than just murder, manslaughter, and sexual assault. So I think there were parameters that limited the scope of the project, but within those parameters, the project was a success, yes. That being said, I am absolutely passionate about and committed to having a system in place and a process in place to uncover wrongful convictions. So what I've already spoken to the public defender and the head of the criminal defense bar for Boulder, as well as a person at CU's Innocence Project, is starting a conviction review process out of the district attorney's office. That'll be the first one here in the state, and it's a top priority for me to make sure that people in Boulder have some avenue to go to and some collaborative process between defense and prosecution to look back on cases and see if we have ever convicted anybody wrongfully here in Boulder. So that's already, those discussions are underway, and I'm really excited about it.
All right, fantastic. So you most recently worked for the Jefferson County Prosecutor's Office. What would you say is the differences in the political environments from there to Boulder County?
So there are differences between Jefferson County and Boulder. Political environment, that's a good question. So I would answer it this way. I believe that the people of Boulder County are very interested in and invested in us having the best possible criminal justice system and allowing leaders to be innovative and progressive in how we pursue that. So public safety, of course, is always a priority. But I don't believe public safety and criminal justice reform to be mutually exclusive. I think we can make our criminal justice system better, for example, with problem-solving courts and diversion programs, trying to help people get back on the right track while still maintaining, if not increasing, public safety. I think generally speaking, I think Boulder's the kind of community that wants to see that kind of work and wants to see leaders who are willing to and committed to trying to improve the criminal justice system. Not that Jeffco wasn't. I just think Boulder, certainly when I talk to the sheriff, when I talk to county leaders, they seem really invested in us exploring ways to make the criminal justice system better.
All right, fantastic. So you are also in the process of running for state attorneys general, but you kind of shifted at the last minute and applied to become the Boulder County DA. What was the thinking there? Why did you make that shift?
So I've been a prosecutor for 20 years, and the work I've done and the goals I have are completely consistent with becoming Boulder's district attorney. What went into it was last year, Stan Garnett and I, we both served as the two representatives for the state of Colorado on the national DA board. Oh. So we would travel to different places for these board meetings. And I remember last March 2017, at the time, Stan Garnett had filed paperwork to run for attorney general, as you may recall.
Right.
And we went out to dinner after the board meeting and the training that day, and I remember getting back to the hotel room that night and calling my wife and saying, I don't think Stan is going to continue on the path to run for attorney general, and I think he's going to remain Boulder DA for the rest of his term. So I was right about part of that and wrong about the other. When Stan made the decision to withdraw from the attorney general's race, that's when I threw my hat in the ring, because I've always been passionate about the role of the attorney general statewide, having worked there myself. And I think now more than ever, having an attorney general who's going to lead with integrity and who has the experience to lead the staff is particularly important. However, when Stan decided to return to private practice and leave office early, he called me in advance and he encouraged me to apply. And Chief Testa and Sheriff Pelly and members of the staff called me and encouraged me to apply. Members of the criminal defense bar. And I say that to highlight, I guess, that, well, a couple things. First, I do view the Boulder DA's office as a special office in the legal community, not only here in Boulder, but statewide. Thanks in large part to Stan and the staff, the Boulder DA's office has become a leader in the DA community and in criminal justice reform. So I've always wanted to remain in public service. I'm absolutely committed to it. And the opportunity to be a leader in public service in the community in which my family and I live. I mean, I live 10 minutes from the courthouse. And I've seen the impact that office has on the community firsthand as a resident, but also as a prosecutor. And I just thought it was just an incredible opportunity that I would never have predicted coming up in the way it did. But when it did, and when I received the encouragement from law enforcement, the legal community, and the staff of the office, it ended up being an easy decision for me and my wife to pursue the opportunity to become your district attorney.
All right. Fantastic. So, as you know, you'll need to run the office. You'll need to run for this office again in November when the position is open for election. How do you plan on adjusting your approach, if any, from Jefferson County to the environment to better fit into Boulder County? Because you will be running for office, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So I hesitate only because I don't think I have to adjust my approach. I thought you were going to ask how I'm going to juggle it all, in which case I was going to ask you for your help. But I do have a lot of help, and I have an incredibly supportive and much smarter than me wife, so we're making it all work. But I don't think it's so much adjusting the approach. I mean, we have, in Jefferson County, we've established a robust diversion program. We also have problem-solving courts. We have problem-solving courts in Jefferson County that we don't yet have in Boulder. Adult mental health court, juvenile mental health court. Those are some of the things I would love to work with other county leaders to make happen in Boulder. Do you need to stop? I'm sorry. Oh.
I don't know where that came from. Ignore it.
So I don't think it's about adjusting approach. I think it's about learning how we do things in the Boulder DA's office, learning how to work within the county system and some of the county leaders here, and just continuing to do what I've done throughout my career, trying to maintain an office where we have outstanding women and men who are committed to public safety and also to making the criminal justice system work for everyone. So although I'm new to the Boulder DA's office in some respects, it's worth mentioning that I've handled special prosecutions over the years for the Boulder DA's office. So those are cases where Stan Garnett and his office had to conflict off a case for a particular reason. So the most recent example being the prosecution of Detective Jack Gardner, who was with the Boulder Police Department, but as you may recall, had assisted an internet predator in avoiding apprehension. So I was asked to prosecute the internet predator, who ended up pleading guilty and going to state prison, and prosecute Jack Gardner. He ended up going to trial and asserting a mental health defense, saying that he had, because of the work he'd done in his career, had PTSD and blacked out and committed this criminal offense. That case went to trial in Boulder, and he was convicted by the jury. So having tried that case, handled the internet predator, handled other cases, I also teach ethics statewide for DAs all throughout the state. So between trainings and those cases, I've gotten to know the staff of the DA's office over the years. So most of the senior staff, if not all, I've had the opportunity to work with over time. So although I'm new to the office and I bring energy and ideas to the office that I think that I'm very excited about, many of the staff I've had the opportunity to work with.
All right. I have to ask this. Are you still planning on getting into the AG race?
No.
Not at all. So you're out of that.
Yes, 100%.
All right.
I'm glad you asked, 'cause I don't want there to be any doubt about that.
All right. Well, it's something you have to ask.
When I applied for the position of Boulder District Attorney, I made a public announcement suspending the AG campaign because I wanted it to be transparent. I didn't want to be campaigning for one office while quietly applying for another, so I just was very open about that and shut down the AG campaign. There's no AG campaign. I'm 100% committed to being District Attorney.
All right. So, because you're running again in November, not again, but running in November, and you'll almost for sure be running against Mike Foote.
Yes.
He said so. Why would you be a better choice than Mike Foote for this office?
So to be the District Attorney of Boulder, I think there are a few things that you require to do the job well. Leadership experience and trial experience is one of the top three things. So I've been a leader at the Manhattan DA's office where I supervised 1,300 people. I've been at the Attorney General's office where I supervise not only the attorneys but also the support staff in statewide prosecutions. And for the last 5 years, I've been in an office that's more than twice the size of the Boulder DA's office, where I was in charge of the day-to-day operations there, including still handling cases myself. So that's the experience I bring to the Boulder DA's office. I also have a proven track record of criminal justice reform. My wife and I moved here to start a wrongful conviction project. I was the point person on drug sentencing reform in 2012 here in Colorado, where we lowered the sentences for drug offenses and helped decrease the number of people going to state prison for drug offenses. There's still a lot of work to be done in that area, but we made a lot of progress in 2012. In 2013, I was the point person for the district attorneys in changing the procedures that law enforcement use for eyewitness identifications. So if you're looking at a lineup or a photo lineup, there are now set procedures that are scientifically valid that law enforcement throughout the entire state have to use. And I was a part of that effort along with the Innocence Project and the Defense Bar and members of the legislature. And for my work on that project, I received an award from the Innocence Project. So as a prosecutor, to get an award from the Innocence Project, I was really honored by that. And I've been teaching law enforcement around the state about eyewitness identification procedures, but also body cameras. So most recently, I taught all the prosecutors across the state at the statewide conference on the use of body cameras for law enforcement. So those are just a few examples of the work I've done in criminal justice reform, in addition to developing problem-solving courts and diversion programs in Jefferson County that I do want to bring to Boulder if we can. And the third thing, and it's also important, is having the support of Stan Garnett and the staff. Because to me, we are all invested in a smooth transition for the community and the staff. We have 5 murder cases pending this year. So we should, in my mind, support the staff, help the staff, but to have their support in applying for this position and now to be their district attorney and Stan Garnett's support, I think means a lot.
All right. So you're going to get asked this by a lot of people, but why public service? Why not a lucrative private practice, particularly in Colorado right now?
Right.
What really motivates you to be a public servant versus making a lot more money as a private lawyer?
It's a good question, but to me, it's a question I answered 25 years ago, and the answer remains the same. And it's because it's hardwired into who I am that we should all try to make a difference in the community. In whatever field we're in, that we should try to make a difference and help those around us. So there are other jobs where you could do that, but for me, being a district attorney is one where I've found it to be the most rewarding. Sometimes really incredibly challenging too, but incredibly meaningful to try to make a difference for victims, offenders, and the community at large. So I went to law school knowing I was going to go into public service, and that has never wavered, not for a second.
All right. So what's your proudest moment as an assistant DA in the 1st Judicial District? What did you do that really sticks out in your head?
It's a good question. We had a lot of great successes in terms of setting up the problem-solving courts and diversion programs, a lot of serious trials, some of which I tried myself, others in which I supported and supervised the people trying the cases. I don't know, I'd have to give them more thought. Actually, I don't know if there's a...
There are no set answers on anything, and you don't have to answer any of these, as you may recall. So
No, it's not that I'm avoiding it. It's there's a whole flurry of cases and moments that are flying through my mind right now.
So we can come back to that if you like.
Why don't we come back to that? Because I'd like to answer it for you, but I'll give it more thought as we're talking.
So you said in a recent statement that you wanted to ensure public safety and achieve progressive criminal justice reform in Boulder County. What does the phrase progressive criminal justice reform mean to you?
It means doing things better and differently than we've done them in the past. I look at a couple things. First, statewide, 48% of the people released from state prison are back in state prison within 3 years. 48%. No one could point to that number and tell me it's a success. No one could point to that number and tell me we can't do it better. I look at drug addiction in Boulder County as a problem that we all have a stake in. You know, sometimes people will say to me, well, it's the addict's problem. First of all, that's not very compassionate in my mind. I think it's something we should all try to help with. It's a disease. But also, as a prosecutor, I've seen firsthand that often drug addiction can be so powerful that it will prompt people to commit crimes they would otherwise not commit. So when we see an increase in car thefts and break-ins, home burglaries, those are often tied to drug addiction. So I'm excited about, I had a meeting the other day with PEN, the Parent Engagement Network, talking about the work they're doing on opioid abuse, which is so important for all of us. And we had 50,000 people die nationwide last year from opioid overdoses. 2/3 of them had obtained the painkillers through some legitimate means. So when I was a prosecutor in New York City, I grew up on cases where people were dealing in back alleys and on street corners. And this is someone's going into the medicine cabinet of either they or a loved one or a friend and taking the pills and abusing them and then getting hooked and getting themselves in trouble. So we all have a stake in that. So progressive criminal justice reform means looking at, for example, bond. What are we using bond for or bail for? Who's being held on that? I don't think people should be held just because they're poor. I don't think we do anyone a service when we hold them in jail and they miss their kids, they miss their job, they lose their job. So being more thoughtful and looking at the data to help us improve the criminal justice system is something I've been working on for years and I'm excited to do as Boulder District Attorney.
Right. Do you think a college education is important for law enforcement professionals to obtain, and in what fields or circumstances would you recommend pursuing an advanced degree?
For prosecutors, you mean?
I'm talking about generally the law enforcement field. It would also include law enforcement.
It's a good question. I don't have a set answer to it. I will say, as the son of a New York City public school teacher and as a graduate of community college myself, I've just seen firsthand the benefits of going to school. Not everyone has the means or the opportunity to do so, but for those that do, I think we better ourselves. And for law enforcement, when given the tremendous responsibility and power they have, the more educated they are, the more trained they are, just generally speaking in life, the better off they're going to be in their career. That's just my general take on it.
All right. So how do you feel about Colorado's legalization of cannabis?
The people of Colorado have spoken loud and clear about the legalization of cannabis. I will say, and this is compelling to me, people have come to really rely on that constitutional provision now. I mean, I was at a coffee shop recently for a meet and greet for the campaign, and there were about 20, 25 people there. At least 10 of them are working in or connected to the cannabis industry. And given the financial investment, career investment that they've put into it and their families have come to rely on, I'm absolutely opposed to the federal government coming in, just simply given a change in administration and flipping that all upside down. So I strongly support the constitutional provision that allows for the legalization of cannabis, and I think it's the right of Coloradans to do so. I will say, as a prosecutor, I continue to see too much black market violence. So I was pleased last year that the governor took steps to reduce black and what they call gray market marijuana trade. Whether it's the taxes being too high or the regulations being too many, there's still incentive, in my opinion, for people to deal marijuana on the streets and in the parking lots. And when you do that, given the money that's involved, you can have robberies and shootings, and we've had that. We've had them in Jeffco far too often. So I'd like to see that reduced. That's very much a concern of mine.
All right. What's your position on the apparent federal shift in attitude towards cannabis? Are what they doing correct? I mean, I understand where your stance is on
Right.
Colorado. What do you think about it on a federal level?
I think it's a mistake. I think in a world of limited resources, they're making a terrible mistake trying to dedicate resources to that effort. We have not seen any direct impact on Colorado. However, that being said, certainly people involved in the cannabis industry have reason to be incredibly concerned, and they've expressed that concern to me. Our current U.S. Attorney for Colorado, Bob Troyer, has spoken publicly about his plan to not change his approach or his office's approach to cannabis-related offenses. Quite frankly, I think the federal government is trying to put us in a time machine to go back and fight a drug war that we fought and lost 30 years ago. And I think we need to be smarter about how we approach it and smarter about how we dedicate our resources.
All right. So Longmont, which is where we're at,
Yes.
has a pretty significant Latino population.
Yes.
So what's your position on DACA as well as working with federal ICE authorities?
Good question. So I was at the El Comité dinner on Saturday night. I've actually been in Longmont 3 times in the last 3 days, which you could either call poor scheduling or a dedication to the Longmont community, and in all seriousness, it's the latter.
We like that.
So to answer your question, I'm going to continue Stan Garnett's commitment to the immigration community of Boulder County. I'm passionate about it. I'm committed to it. We're going to maintain our immigration protection program, which is more important now than ever before, given what we see coming at us from the federal government. I approach this, not everyone shares the same views on immigration that I do, which I'll just touch on briefly. I mean, I'm the grandson of 4 immigrants who came to this country, worked hard, and now I'm sitting here as your district attorney, which is amazing. I mean, that's how the American dream should work. You should be able to have a legal path to citizenship and a legal path to employment. Now, not everyone agrees with me on that, and that's okay. That being said, as a prosecutor in New York City handling sex assault cases, the number of victims who were afraid to come forward because they thought they were going to be deported. So we started doing more and more community outreach and putting more resources into our U-Visa program. A U-Visa program, as you may know, is a district attorney can sign a certification for someone who's in the country undocumented, who cooperates with the prosecution of a case, as long as it's one of the qualifying charges. There are only certain charges that qualify. And then submit that certification to the federal government to support someone remaining in the country and being allowed to stay in the country legally. So I was part of that effort in Manhattan, part of that effort in Jefferson County, and I'm going to continue the great work Stan Garnett's done in that here in Boulder. I'm reminded of a case from, this is a million years ago now, but 2 young women who were sexually assaulted over and over and over again by a man who threatened to have them deported if they spoke up. That's the kind of thing that people may not agree with me on my views on immigration, but I think we all agree that sex assault victims and other victims of crime should know that they can come forward and be protected and be heard. And I'm committed to doing that as district attorney.
All right. So here's a fun subject, very timely. What is your opinion of our current gun laws? And just to add on to that, what's your opinion of, well, actually, should teachers be armed, all or some, or
Right.
none? So kind of see what you can mix those up and come up with.
Okay. It is very timely. In fact, as you know, I was a little late to this meeting because I drove up by the school and the students were outside for the walkout today.
That's right.
Yes.
That is today.
Which is, I think it's to sidetrack for 1 second. People may not agree with what the students are standing for. The fact that they're standing for what they believe in, I think, is something we should all applaud. I think it's wonderful that they're out there and that they're taking collective action together. I mean, I look back in high school. Can you imagine being in high school back then and having high schools around the nation join in an effort? And in a democracy, I think it's really important that we applaud them for standing up for what they believe in and speaking out. So to answer your question, as district attorney, I'm absolutely committed to making sure domestic violence offenders and convicted felons do not possess firearms. Those are laws that I've helped enforce in the past, and I'm going to make sure our office continues to do that. I think that's critically important. I'd also like to see, when you talk about school safety, some of the great work that's been done in Boulder County already continue. And by that I mean, so I attended 2 school safety presentations for parents last week in the St. Vrain Valley School District. So one was at Erie Middle School, and the other was right over here at Timberline. And St. Vrain has been working on this since 2008. So as the superintendent stated, this is not a new effort on their part. But he walked the parents through all the things the school district has done, over time. And I think we need to continue doing those things. And as DA and working with law enforcement and the schools, I'm absolutely committed to it. To answer your question about teachers being armed, my personal view, and again, as district attorney, I don't have control over this, but I will speak out about it, and I'll answer anybody who asks. I don't think our teachers should be armed in our schools. I have 10-year-old twins who are in the public school system here in Boulder County. I worry about where those guns are being kept during the day if teachers are being armed. I mean, you have 25 kids in the classroom. Where are those guns being kept during the day where it's safe? And if the answer is it's being kept on the teacher's person, I don't know if we want our kids, my kids, staring at a gun all day long. So I worry about that. Plus, I recognize the tremendous amount of training that police officers and DA investigators, my investigators, go through every year. So that if they're ever in a stressful situation, an active shooter situation, they do the right thing. We know that police officers, despite all that training, make mistakes. So with kids involved in the schools, how much training are we going to require of the teachers, and how much school are they going to miss to go through that training? So for those reasons, my own personal view is that we should not arm our teachers.
All right. What about concealed carry permits? What requirements should we have in place for people to obtain them?
So I support the Second Amendment, of course. I honor it. I understand that in Colorado a lot of people have firearms, and a lot of us have applied for concealed carry permits. I do not, to be clear. But people have concealed carry permits, and I think making sure the laws are enforced to make sure that the domestic violence offenders, convicted felons, those with serious mental illness that law enforcement become aware of, that those individuals are not able to obtain concealed carry permits.
All right. So what's your position on the death penalty?
So
we have it here in Colorado. So
we do, yes. I'm aware of that.
I bet you are.
So the death penalty is the law of the land in Colorado. It remains the law of the land, and as district attorney, I simply can't ignore the law. That being said, I'm against the death penalty, and I don't foresee ever pursuing it as your district attorney. I'm against the death penalty because I'm morally opposed to it. I don't believe a government should put its own citizens to death. When I interned for the public defender's office back in law school, I worked on a death penalty appeal for the entire summer. One case, a guy named James Hardy, who had been convicted as horrific murder, he was released 2 years ago. The entire time, since I first saw him, and 10 years prior, all the way up until 2 years ago, he was on death row in California. And he was released 2 years ago. And in some ways that just highlights the concerns I have about the death penalty. But I will also say the time, resources that go into it are a factor for me to consider as district attorney. And resources, I don't mean just financial, although those are huge in number. I mean the emotional resources and the drain on the victims and the community. I mean, basically, we allow the offender to be in the news every day for years when we pursue the death penalty. And finally, as Boulder's district attorney, I have to consider my ethical and legal obligation to be able to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. Will a jury convict? And in the death penalty case, as you may know, the final question at the sentencing phase for the jury is, do you believe morally that it's justified to put this person to death? And I would have to, before filing death penalty, seeking a death sentence, decide, are we going to have 12 jurors from Boulder County unanimously agree that it's morally justified to put someone to death? And given all those concerns, I don't foresee pursuing a death penalty case during my time as district attorney.
All right. So, do you have any political ambitions beyond Boulder County DA currently?
I do not. It's been a tremendous honor, and as evidenced by the last year, I don't have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan beyond remaining in public service and being committed to being a leader in public service. That's actually what it came down to when I decided to apply for district attorney. I woke up one morning, I looked at my wife, I said, if my goal is to be a leader in public service, how don't we do this? She said, exactly, because she'd been trying to convince me of what I now know, which is being Boulder DA is the absolute right thing for me, and I could not be more thrilled.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like us to know about you?
Well, I've shared with you my priorities for the future going forward. That's something I shared with the staff, the Criminal Defense Bar, and the county commissioners right when I took office, because I believe it's important to give people an idea of my priorities, but also my goals for the future of the district attorney's office. We have great people working there. The people of Boulder can be proud of that office. Stan Garnett did a terrific job building that office up. I also think we are at a time now in our state and in our county where we could make the system even better. There's momentum there to do it. I think there are some things we're going to be able to do for the office and for the community to improve public safety and improve the approach we take to criminal justice.
Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
No, I was excited to be here, and I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.